Okay, welcome to this session about areas to talk to missionaries about regarding their transition. And the speaker for this session is the one and only Amy Young.
Which is true of all of us. We're the one and only.
Yeah, but it's especially true for you. Amy Young is one of the main editors of Velvet Ashes, an online community for women serving overseas. Previous to that, she was director of member care for an organization in China, and she and I served together. We were teammates for 15 years, hence the
snarkiness. I don't harass everybody this much. You don't.
And so it's my particular privilege to have her here this weekend. She lives in Denver, and so she's here this weekend, and we're catching up. So we worked together in Beijing, like I said, for 15 years. She's also the author of the book, Looming Transistions. So speaking on helping people transition to the field and from the field is her specialty. And it's a real treat to have you here.
Thank you.
And it's all yours.
Thank you.
And that thing is on.
Okay.
So whatever that means, that thing is on. So be good. Behave.
You're asking a lot of me.
I know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Again, looking at the workshops that are available now, I mean, it's just there's so many great ones. So I'm really honored that you're here. So I really appreciate it. Briefly looking at the handout, I am the author of Looming Transitions, and just so you know, for people that you work with, it's intended for the 4 to 6 months before a big transition to kind of help you get ready for that transition. Whether it's going to the field, transitioning even on the field to another location, maybe you're transitioning still within your same organization to another assignment, to language school, to a whole other country. Maybe sadly for some reason the country you're serving in, you're no longer able to serve there, and so you're transitioning to another country. Or transitioning either to a furlough, a home assignment, or even off the field. So that's sort of, and I meant to put on the handout, but you know how you have great ideas once they're all printed? So yes. And I hope you can read that. It's Gumroad, which I'm saying it out loud. It's like a weird website. Like I have no idea why they named their website Gumroad. But it's gumroad.com. And then I have a page there, /Amy Young. So I've written a number of companion resources. After the book came out, then people would say, well, do you have anything for families in transition? And I was like, well, I don't, but give me a couple of weeks and a month or so. So I've written a companion guide called 22 Activities for Families in Transition that follows the structure of Looming Transition. So the parents can read it, have the ideas, and then have activities that can be age-appropriate, adjusted to having families in transition. And really the main longing for that one is for families to create a shared identity and vocabulary as they're going through the transition. As you guys know, transitions, we don't all hit the same points at the same time, and so it can be actually an experience where people within the same system, be that family, marriage, on a team, actually find themselves more disconnected from each other. And so that shared vocabulary to sort of talk about what's going on, that's just my hope. It's still going to be messy. It's still going to be hard for families. But if we've got ways that we can share, that would just be wonderful. And then I have a workbook that goes along with the book, Looming Transitions. And the reason I have used Gumroad, and just a little FYI for those of you who are trying to get resources into the hands of international people, if you go with traditionally printed books, a lot of the print-on-demand stuff, you can have it shipped overseas, but it's so expensive. And so I wanted a downloadable PDF that could easily get into people's hands right away. And that way that if they wanted to print it out, they can have the physical copy and staple it. Or if they just are the kind of person that wants to do things online. So it's a downloadable PDF where it has text boxes. So if people want to type in it, they can type their answers into the workbook. Or if they want to print it out and handwrite them. So I tried to think of different modalities. And in particular, we start here at the top with just this verse from Psalm 139. There's a whole section in the workbook working through Psalm 139. And I should just mention the workbook is $5. I wanted it to be very reasonably priced to get in the hands. And yet also part of my philosophy is if everything is totally free, you don't value as much something you haven't put a little skin in the game. So I feel $5 is enough to say I've got some skin in the game, but it's not so much to say I can't afford that resource. So the 22 activities for families is $5, and the Looming Transitions workbook is $5. And as well, there's an audio version there. So Gumroad.com, we don't have to get off onto my philosophy on self-publishing, but if you guys are audiobook listeners and you use Audible.com, you know a lot of audiobooks, in my opinion, are ridiculously priced. Way too expensive. And you can see Looming Transitions. It's not the longest book. It's like 150 pages. Well, to make it as an audiobook, I, as an author, don't have the right on Audible to set the price. They set it. So they will insist on $15 to $25. And I just think that's way too much. So I wanted to find a way around the system, but to still get quality material into the hands of missionaries. So it turns out I'm related to a voiceover talent, so I hired my sister to professionally record. And you all will appreciate this. My sister's an atheist. And so, I know. And so I said to her, you understand the subject matter. You understand who I am. And I understand if philosophically you do not want to record this book. I am cool with that. And she did. And this is now my heart of how God's going to win her back. She's going to read audiobooks for Christians. This is my plan. So it's very, very subtle. I know, isn't that the coolest? So my sister read it. And Gumroad has an app. So people can just download the Gumroad app. It brings the audiobook right into it. And it's exactly like on Audible.com. So they just start listening. Chapter 1 goes into Chapter 2, Chapter 3. And so right now, that's available $10, and I threw in the workbook. Again, I need to recoup some of the cost for processing material, but I still want it to be really affordable. And I know some people are just not readers. And so if they've got the audiobook, if they're in their apartment wherever around the world, listening to this material, and it gets it into them, and it's another way to get the information. And I think that's what we're all about as well. Getting information to people and not letting the package, how it's packaged, be either a barrier or so. So I just wanted to let you know the book is available. There are physical copies. It's on Kindle. It's on Audible. I just want to get it out to people because I believe so much the more we can help sort of prevent some stuff, there's always going to be fallout, but it's so different from a speed bump versus like going over the Grand Canyon, right? And so we're just trying to help people, like these are kind of the warning signs of speed bumps.
What did you say the ideal time frame is?
The ideal time frame is 4 to 6 months. But even if they read it after, I've had people, and you can go on Amazon. I feel so, Joanne, don't laugh at me too much. I'm so self-promoting. I'm trying to promote the material, not myself, because I believe so much in this material, the difference it will make in people's lives. Most of the reviews, I think there's about 65 reviews on Amazon. Most are people I don't know at all. And so you can read real people who have read it out on the field. And some have even said, I read this book 2 years after I went through a transition. I wish I'd read it before, but it still helped me process now the transition I went through. So ideally, 4 to 6 months ahead of time. But I also just think scarcity mindset is so much what the enemy wants us to think. If you don't do it at the right time, you've totally missed out. And that is so not God's message for anyone, is it? It's ideal 4 to 6 months, but if you even read it 5 years or 5 years before you're going or whatever, like nothing is wasted in God's kingdom. That is just my heart. Nothing is wasted in God's kingdom. So today we are going to be talking about, I'm going to share part of one chapter from the book. And these are just areas I think it's so great for all of us to know about ourselves regardless of whether you're in transition or not. And I want to talk to you about them now so you can even get to know the people you're working with before they're in times of transition and stress. I think these are just kind of great life principles. And I believe they're good for us to know about ourselves as well. So I hope you leave feeling more equipped for the people you're working with, but even more equipped to understand yourself, other relationships you're in, whether it's coworkers, roommates, family members, children, all of that. Like that's, again, just what I love. That God is a God who values knowing. It's not a God of, he's not a God of, well, I just hope you figure it out. Or I'm going to keep this piece of yourself from yourself. But this is a God who wants us to know ourselves, to know the people that we're serving, to know our family members, our coworkers, and that knowing is ongoing. Isn't that beautiful? That we know, and yet there's always more to know. That is just so beautiful. When it comes to stress, I loved the plenary session this morning, and I just felt like, man, he teed it up for exactly what I was going to speak on. You'd think like we were in connection, or that the Holy Spirit is working everything out. Like, I don't know. It's so amazing. One thing I'll just add about stress is we all have sort of like who we normally are, and then who we are under stress. And we all have, you all went, like you know, that there are kind of the two sides to yourself, who you are and who you are under stress. And that sometimes who you are under stress takes who you are, and it's like the ugly side of who you are, and not always kind of the beautiful side, the strength of that. So who we are is always going to have kind of that two-edged, the two-sided coin of the beautiful part of however that wiring is, and then the shadow side, using the Enneagram language, the shadow side of that wiring. Because we all come from an orientation, we're going to think, well, the way I'm wired, obviously, is a little bit better than the way you're wired. And so I understand, even as a presenter, God has given me wirings in certain areas of each of these. And so I'm going to try to present both sides as evenly as I can, but understanding I myself come from a perspective and a preference. And so I will try not to let my bias come through too much. But if you're from the other wiring that God has given, please understand it's of equal value. These are sort of neutral things. They're just facts and realities of God. This is the beautiful thing is God can be all of these at once, but on a continuum, we can only fall at one place. We cannot hold the whole continuum in our personality, which again I think points to the beautifulness of our limitedness and the amazing unlimitedness of God. It's beautiful until it's stressful, and your way and my way are like clashing. But even in that, I think God, like that's why it's nice to talk about it now and understand that, to understand in times of stress when we're clashing, that's kind of what's going on, is just my way and your way of being wired or choosing to do something is clashing. So how can we find a way that probably this wiring and that wiring is never going to 100% gel, but we can kind of shave off those big speed bumps a little bit. So we just sort of have to slow the car down and not totally like strand the car up. You know, some speed bumps are so high, you actually cannot get over them and you get stuck. And so that's kind of our hope as practitioners. We're never, the goal here is not kumbaya, no stress. That's called heaven. So we will, and even there, I think, we don't have to get into my philosophy of heaven. Heaven's not going to be boring. So there's still going to be bumps somehow, but it's not going to be the same kind of bumps as we have here on earth. So I really wanted to stress that first point. Don't get hung up on right or wrong. Which wiring is right or wrong? Which is the right way to be? There are a few that will certainly make life easier in certain situations, but that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. And I think that, again, is just so key as we're working with people. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. The way that you are is beautiful. It is wonderful how God has wired you. I think the key is, do you understand yourself so that you know who you are in normal situations and in stressful situations? And then, do I understand my spouse? Do I understand my children? Do I understand my coworkers? Do I even understand, to a certain extent, the culture that I'm in, how they handle and manifest stress? And then I can hopefully bring my best to that as I understand more what's going on. It just helps to make sense of what's going on instead of, well, you're the biggest jerk on the planet. You know, you're just a person under stress. I'm a person under stress. Let's figure out how to get through this. So the first area that we can look at under stressful situations and normal situations is, are you a procrastinator or someone who starts early on tasks? Are you a procrastinator or someone who starts early on tasks? So, just as a slight mini poll in here for yourself, just thinking of yourself, are you someone who tends to start early on tasks? Would you be one that gets stuff going early? All right, so I'd say that's what, about 40%. Are you a procrastinator?
Thank you, we're on the majority.
Doesn't make you right.
We didn't say right or wrong. We said majority. Think about it.
I'll tell you tomorrow.
humorous. When you're not in the situation, to be outside sort of watching, it is a little humorous to see how this can play out. But you could see in a marriage or on a team, even within a culture or within an organization, like, we need this piece of information, like, what's the latest I can get it in? And you're like, oh man, if someone's asking, what's the latest? You know their orientation, you know how they're wired, you know how they're wired. Now, Joanne and I, because we do, she's like, because we do know each other very well, we are wired totally differently at this one. And the nice thing is we know this about each other. We're able to own our own wiring and then tease each other. So tease each other kindly, not inappropriately. Always kindly. My wiring is, I like to have things done the absolute earliest. I cannot understand the logic of my best thinking is at the last minute.
Yeah.
See, yeah, and I have to believe you because there's enough of you who say it that it
When the creativity happens.
that it must be true. But see, that's not when my creativity happens. That's when I am so overwhelmed, my stomach is churning so much, I'm not sleeping, my jaw hurts, all of that. I'm the kind of person, I just like these handouts. That's why I forgot to add that, but they were done like 2 weeks ago. And they've been sitting and just ready. I was ready. I had ordered the books. I ordered copies of the books, and Joanne's mom lives in town and sent a box of books, a month ago? Yeah. I just like to know they're there. And then I feel things are going to happen in life, and so the things I can plan to get dealt with, I like to get them dealt with ahead of time, so then I have the emotional space and resources to deal with the surprises. That's just my wiring. But you could see how that could clash with someone I'm teamed with, or I'm married to, or I'm in a culture with that wants things done at a different time frame than what feels reasonable to me. I think this is also the thing with personality. The question kind of is, well, what feels reasonable? And so from each of our vantage points, there is a sense of what's reasonable. There can be the bell curve, plus or minus this. And if you're kind of in the middle on the continuum, then you can kind of go with either side more easily. But if you're on extremes. And so for this, that is where each system is going to kind of have to navigate what works best. In a marriage, actually I'll give an example. With Velvet Ashes, we have connection groups, which are small groups that meet for 10 weeks. This Tuesday, we're going to be launching the registration, where people will sign up for their spring connection groups. And I have an assistant who works with me. And about 2 weeks ago, so she does all the admin stuff. She collects all the information for the people who are going to be the facilitators, what time they're going to meet, their bios, and then she puts it all together on our website. So people can go and just sign up for the different. Well, you can guess, when I was totally in charge of it, and I was the only one that did it, because it hadn't grown large enough to need an assistant, I got to do everything exactly the way that I wanted, which meant everything was done weeks in advance, and then just the last minute tweaking. Well, her name is Emily, and I have learned through this process, Emily has a very different wiring than I do, which is, again, neither good nor bad. But since we didn't totally know that about each other, we didn't realize, I'm sure she has been wondering, why are you sending me these emails like so far in advance? So about 2 weeks ago, I woke up on a Saturday and I just realized internally I was a hot mess. Like my stomach was just hurting, that we were not where I felt we needed to be on this project. And ultimately, I'm responsible for it. So I feel the stress of all of these women, because it ends up being about 160 women, missionary women around the world involved in small groups. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, here is 160 people that are going to miss out on connection and just that sense of what's going on and the way that God is going to meet them. And so I am probably catastrophizing a tiny bit of all of these people that, and it does fall on her, but it falls more on me, ultimately, as the person responsible. And I realized, Emily is just doing things differently than you. And this is really more your issue than her issue. Because it's not, she has not missed the deadline. She has not missed the deadline. She has not done her job. So I emailed her. She lives in Ghana. So again, you throw distance in. So again, and this is the world we live in, right? You're working with someone in this country or this country or this country. And now I'm trying to communicate through email. I'm actually not annoyed. I'm just stressed. But we know each other, but we don't know each other totally well. So sometimes tone in writing can be hard to read and hard to gauge and hard to really communicate. And so I wrote her and I just said, in essence, Emily, I woke up this morning very stressed about connection groups, and I realized this is on me because we have not clarified exactly that you are doing this and I am doing, you have part A and you can do part A however you want, and I have part B and I can do part B however I want. All I need to know is that you have part A and then I'm fine. It's me wondering if part A is going to fall back on me that's causing me stress. And I said, this email, just so you understand, is 100% about me. I am the one who is stressed. And if you could please reassure me you've got A, I am fine. I am fine. But understanding it's my wiring, it's my preference. And that's just kind of how it plays out. And she emailed back, yes, I've got A. And I was like, and it's done. Good. No problem. Since she hadn't said I've got A, the back of my mind, I was worrying, do you really have A, or is it going to fall on me? Because if it's going to fall on me, I'm going to this conference, I'm doing other things. I want to get it done because I want to do what I do well, which I think we all want to do what we do well. So I think if we can just help people understand and tune in to when there is some clash going on in a marriage, so talking to people before they're going to be going into a transition. Husband, what's your wiring? Wife, what's your wiring? How have you sort of seen that play out? How do you think that might play out here? Or even roommates. All of these conversations that I think sometimes we just assume so much that we forget we're even assuming it until we're really angry internally. And so trying to just be aware of what's going on and then communicating it. The second area, thoroughness of task completion. So, are you a finish the entire task kind of person, or are you a doing most is good enough kind of a person? So I'll say that again. Are you a finish the entire task kind of a person, or are you a doing most is good enough kind of a person? How I discovered this difference, we're all scientists in our own life. Our lives are just one big experiment, right? That we learn things through. Oh, wait, you think that? I didn't even know anyone could think that way until you said that. So this one came into most of my childhood. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. We had a two-car garage. Most of my childhood, our garage was entirely full of my great aunt and uncle's things, as they died or transitioned from housing down to assisted living, down to this. Their things, their life treasures, except they weren't because it's old dishes. It was not family treasures is what I'm saying. But they grew to live in our garage. And so most of my childhood, our cars were always parked outside. I just didn't realize, actually cars can be parked in garages. They're not storage space. So one year when I was home from the field, one summer I was home, so I was an adult now, living in China, home one summer, had some free time, and I was like, let's start to get rid. We now know, sadly, because the reason so much of that stuff was kept was when my sisters and I became adults. Then, you'll have dishes. Well, by this point, we're all adults, and we have started our adult life, so we don't need the things that are in the garage. And I had some free time, so I was like, let's get going through this. So one of my sisters lived in town, and we would go through it. Man, the treasures we found. Just, wow. Boxes of gigantic pieces of black coal. And let me tell you, black coal is super, super heavy. So we couldn't just put it in the trash and break someone's back. So we had to space it out week by week. How much coal we would put out of consideration for it was really, So we have, my sister and I, and every now and then, like my dad would come and help a little bit. We have gotten all of it cleaned out. This probably took 2 different summers, 2 different times, but it was really quite impressive, I have to say. We get down to 1 box left, and I can vividly see this. My dad and I, we get to it, I'm like, oh, I am so excited. Because what a big task, and we are about to cross that finish line, and just that rush of a task done. And my dad said, let's leave it. And I talk about styles crashing. I just was like, absolutely not. No. If I have to, we're dragging your dead body across the line too. No. We are finishing this task. And it just was, and like he looked at me and I looked at him, and it really was like, what planet are you from? He just thought it'd be so good to not finish it. Like get it mostly done. And so it's hard for me to present from the other side being viable because it's so inconceivable to me that you would not finish a task. But there are just some people. There are just some people that, for whatever reason, and there can be a whole host of reasons. Psychoanalyzing, this was not my father. And again, that's right, you don't psychoanalyze everybody. But some people, if they complete a task, then it's what am I going to be responsible for? So if I get it mostly done, but I don't totally finish it, I don't have another thing I have to do. So there can be a whole host of reasons why someone does or doesn't finish stuff. I think my dad just, for some reason, because it was pretty consistent, like he would do everything almost up to, so he always got most of it done. My father has sadly since died, and so now I'm going through the man never met a piece of paper he didn't want to keep. He died 3 years ago, and I'm just now getting to their old tax forms.
Oh.
And my parents got married in 1965, and I started shredding his tax documents from 1960. So even before he was married, almost every year he filed for an extension. So there was just, but just to say, like, this is just, which again, I'm like, 1 year I get it, like a crisis can come up. Any of us can understand needing an extension. Like, so I'm not saying I wouldn't myself someday file for an extension, but I've never filed for an extension, and I don't think many people have, except my father is an incredibly responsible person who left my mom and the family financially well set up, well provided for. It's just so interesting that this is just a part. And now that my sister has taken over my parents' taxes, helping my mom again is just like, I had no idea it could be like this. And that's where my dad, he was wired one way, and it worked for him. That's what I'm saying, is he got his taxes paid. He was a responsible person. This was a good guy. But just the way he approached things and the way I would approach things are very, very different. And so in some of those, just having to navigate and negotiate who is ultimately in charge of this responsibility. So if your style is really different than someone else's, then, and my mom's style was quite different than my dad's, but it's like, if I will delegate to you, you're in charge of the taxes, so you have the right to do it your way. So if you want to file for an extension and an extension and an extension, that is not how I would do it, but if that's how you do it and it gets done, but then truly releasing it to that person. That's also the key then, is not saying, I release it to you, but I reserve the right to, Monday morning quarterback. Then saying, no, truly, I release it to you. If you need my help or if you need my input, that's fine. Like, you can still bounce the ball back to me. We're still a team here. We're still working together on this. But if I release someone to someone else to do it, to realize, then that's on me. That's on me to truly release it and say, you have the freedom to approach this task however you want to do it. I was going to look to see. Okay, yeah, let me do one more example on that, where I also saw this play out on the field. Good friends of Joanne's and mine, Mike and Ann Pakovich. A family of 6. Oh, you know the Pakoviches too. Love them. So Mike and Ann, they have 4 children, and they were getting ready to transition back to the States permanently. They'd lived on the field a long time, so they had the whole house set up. Again, what I'm saying is there's a lot of stuff. When you're going through transitions, there's a lot of stuff we have to deal with, haul with, decide what to do with. And so Their styles were very different. Anne's was get it done good enough because we've got so much to do. If we get bogged down on one little thing, like it could potentially sink the whole gig. Mike, however, is wired to be a bit more of a perfectionist. He wants things, if you're going to do it one time, do it very well. So he was supposed to go through, I believe, I'm trying to remember if it was their CD collection and figure out what can we now get rid of, like what is music we want to keep with us. Well, like 5 hours later on what could have, should have been, a 30-minute to an hour project, Anne is like, what the are you doing? And I want to cuss, but I can't. And he was like, well, I just decided this is the time to totally organize and catalog our entire music library. And he got so, he was like, if we're going to do it, I would rather do it now perfectly, get it totally done, than ship all of this stuff to America and have to redo it. Let's do it once. And so you can just see, neither way is right or wrong. But that can be a huge point of stress and of just needing to figure out ahead of time, maybe even kind of negotiating, what are we envisioning on this project? How much time? At what point do you just need to pull the plug and say, you can give it 2 hours, do it your way, and then the last 30 minutes, I get to come in and do it my way. Or somehow, each system is going to be different. What's going to work in one relationship will not work in another. But I think I said it before, but there's so many assumptions. And so if we can just communicate, and even they knew that about themselves. But sometimes you don't know what it's going to be like until you get into the middle of a situation. That is not the time to have the deep discussion. That's the time to get out of that, whatever that is, and later at a neutral time, kind of come back and do the debrief of this is how I'm wired. That's how you, how do you think you're wired? How is that causing some tension? So in the future, when we're in a similar situation, we now have more resources to deal with it. You can't think of every situation before they happen. You cannot fathom that someone's going to say, let's just leave that box. So it's not, again, about guessing everything. But it's as you go through life, kind of tuning in, paying attention, and then building in within the system, whether that's a team that you're working with, a marriage, an organization, building in the debriefing, building in the mini debriefing that's just going on of kind of what's happening. And I think even that's part of our role as member care, is just hearing people's stories, and then finding out kind of, where do you think the tension was? And how do you think your wiring, or her wiring, or his wiring, or this child's wiring kind of was playing in there? And how could you handle that in another future situation? What have you learned to go forth? Parent-children styles in clash is another big one. So, the third area, and I just want to be attentive to my time, to be respectful for the plenary speaker. Grieving style. Are you a pre-griever or a post-griever? And I would almost tell you, put a star by this one. I think I have very few really great ideas, but if the only reason I was born is to contribute this idea to humanity, I think this idea was worth my whole life. So I can now die. And as I said, these are fleshed out even more in the book. But the friend Mike and Ann that I mentioned before, we lived in the same building for 15 years, and it was just, again, a great experimental box to see life. So that's why a lot of my examples come from them, because we did life together. And that's who you do life together is kind of how you figure out how you're wired as a person, how other people are wired. And so we had been living in Beijing, and both Mike and Ann and I were getting ready to go on a study leave at the same time. So it's so fascinating how God gave us kind of parallel timelines. So that was also why it was so interesting to watch some of these things play out. We were, both of us, getting ready to go on a 3-year study leave. So we'd been on the field at that point a number of years. By that point, I think I'd been on the field 10 years. And so I'm getting ready to go off for 3 years, but I still was going to come back each summer. I still was connected to my organization. And the plan was I returned, and the same for them, that they returned. So as we're entering that last semester, it was so interesting to watch, because I I was looking forward to getting to go to school and getting more training and being back in the States after so long of being gone and being closer to families, and nieces had been born, and I was looking forward to it. But I was also just sad. Like, it's stressful to leave, and I loved my life, and it really wasn't like my grand plan. As Joanne mentioned, I was the director of member care, and I just thought, man, it would be so great if we had a trained counselor on the field and not just people flying in. And God, just bring us a trained counselor. That'd be so wonderful. He's like, that is a great idea. Go get your master's. And I was like, no, the plan is for me to stay here and someone else to join. And he's like, no, the plan is for you to go get the training and bring it back. Okay. So it wasn't reluctant, but it wasn't like this huge excitement. So it was exciting too. I'm kind of all over the board, so it was everything. But I really was just grieving that this was coming to an end, and I wouldn't be in daily life with people like Joanne anymore, and Mike and Ann, and just like my people now were going to be everywhere else, and I was going to be with other people that were my people, but all my people are never in the same place, and you understand that tension. It's just hard to not have all your people together. And so I would cry, and Ann would not. And I was thinking to myself, maybe I really misread our friendship. I thought she'd be a little sad, like to be away from him, kind of fun. I really thought and again, you sort of begin to wonder, maybe I did misread this. Maybe we're not as deep of friends, or I don't mean as much to her as I thought I did. And even they left a few days before I did. The last dinner at their house, this Chinese friend came over, a young man, and I came over. He and I am not kidding, like ridiculous weeping. It's ridiculous weeping. The whole family is like, yeah. And I just think we're both like, do we mean nothing to you? Well, they leave the next day, and then I was kind of like, fine. I was like, oh, I miss them, but okay. Like, moving on. She gets back to the States, and she entered her grief process. And then it was, and which I have to say selfishly, I was like, whew. You do love me, okay. I have not misread our friendship. I have not misread. I do matter to you. Like, I matter in your life. And that's when I realized there are pre-grievers. I do the majority of my grieving before the end of something. And post-grievers, for the most part, 80-20, so you can't say 100%, but for the most part, a post-griever will come to the end and then start their grieving process. Again, both styles work, and there's big advantages and disadvantages to both styles. My grief made sense to people. They totally understood why I was grieving, and they could kind of meet me in that. When Ann started her grieving process, she's in Connecticut with people who are like, why are you grieving China? You got a minivan. Like, you got Costco. I'm not getting this. And so she didn't have the community around her that understood. As a post-griever, the advantage is she was task on, and she got things done. And physically, they ended all of the stuff they needed to get done really well. The downside is then when you're entering the grieving process, the community who really understands the loss, in general, is not there. And the other downside is you can look a little cold. Like, did this matter to you at all? Whatever that was. Did that matter to you at all? And it could appear to people, I care more than you do. That's the disadvantage for post-grievers, is they might have the appearance that they don't care as much, or that something didn't matter as much to them, which is not true. They care and things mattered. It's just going to manifest itself differently than it will for a pre-griever. The advantage for a pre-griever is it is obvious that you're grieving. And so there's people around you who can emotionally meet you and can hug you or can comment or can say, I'm going to miss you too. And that means a lot to a pre-griever, to know I mattered, this mattered, whatever it is. Like, I have left a mark, at least on your heart. You know, in 5 years, no one here is going to remember I was here, but you will remember I was here. And so that emotional connection matters a lot. Now, the sort of downside is they are so busy grieving, they don't get stuff done. They can get so emotionally wrapped up that they will, it gets to the end and maybe like their entire apartment is not packed up. But here's the thing. You all are laughing the knowing laugh. The plane ticket is bought. So who wins? The plane ticket. They get on the plane, and then what they leave behind often is just, it's a big fat mess. It is a big fat mess for those that are behind, either fellow missionaries that are coming. You've all seen the apartments that have, just in case you need, 5,000-year-old Tupperware, And so they don't necessarily hand off well. They don't necessarily hand the baton off well to the person behind them. So they personally might get to finish a little bit better, but they leave a hot mess for everybody else. And post-grievers might leave it much better set up for others, but for themselves, the grieving is just harder because it doesn't make sense. They don't have the people around them. And this can play out, again, whether you're overseas or not. Another colleagues of ours, the Stallings, you guys know the Stallings as well. Sam and Patty they're wired differently. Sam, the husband, is a pre-griever, and Patty is a post-griever. So their first child is getting ready to transition off to college. They're on the field, and again, this is a big one, because she's not only going off to college, she's also going to the other side of the world. They're trying to navigate all of that college stuff from one side of the world. They're trying to navigate all of this. Patty is ecstatic, might be, overplaying it, but she was just so excited for their daughter, Sarah, and for the next stage and what this would mean. And just, as a post-griever, it's not really that our daughter's leaving, it's look what she's going to. Well, Sam, as a pre-griever, was just, that last year, a hot mess. In the best sense of, I'm the dad and this is my first kid. And again, it's the beginning of a huge new transition for our family. Because soon after that, Paul's going to go to college, and then soon after that, Ben's going to go to college, and then our active parenting phase is done. And so he's just grieving all of it. He is just seeing the end of all of it. And it kind of looked like, to them, they were able to discuss it as a couple, to say, you don't seem to really care that our family is changing or that our daughter is leaving. And to be able to go, I do care, I'm just a post-griever. So it's not that I don't care, it's that this is again then how it can manifest. So the family themselves was still staying on the field. So this wasn't even a transition of leaving the field, but it was just a big transition in their family. And so realizing that they were different helped them to go, it's not that Sam cared more than Patty. They both care equally about their daughter. They both are going to be impacted by this transition. It's just going to manifest itself differently. But if you don't understand this is a pre-griever and this is a post-griever, you can see how there can be massive misunderstandings. And internal of, I care more, or you don't care, or did I misread this, or you've got to just cut the apron. All of that stuff can go on. All of that stuff can go on. But when you're aware of the styles, it helps. And one of the reasons I say this is like my one good idea is I have blogged about it, so it's quote unquote out there on the internet. And people from hospice, a number of training programs from hospice have contacted me asking if they can use this in their training material, which I'm like, absolutely. Because they say in hospice situations, they have massively seen this play out as a family member is sadly coming to the end of their lives. And the pre-grievers are just like right there doing all the grieving, and the post-grievers are working on all the details. And it can look again like this person's death, whether it's mom, dad, grandma, aunt, sister, matters more or matters less. And so there can be such hurt among the family members. And I have seen that same amount of hurt among team members. And so if we can just understand this about ourselves, and that's why I love that God is both a pre- and post-griever, and yet we cannot be both. Like this again points to our limitedness and God's infinite limitlessness. But if we can understand this about each other and then figure out how to work together, I think that's even more the beauty, is when these different styles figure out how to work together than when two pre-grievers are together or two post-grievers. It's easy to be like the style you're like, right? But when we find that beauty of connecting to full completion of task, partial completion of task, pre-griever, post-griever, procrastinator or getting it done like you might consider 5 years ahead of time. I consider it just in time. But when we figure out how to work together, there's beauty in that. There's absolute beauty, and that's the body of Christ. And that's, again, where we as Christians have the Holy Spirit who will help us to navigate. The fruit of the Spirit isn't, get it done right. It's love, joy, peace, patience. The final area, this really is for people in transitions. The others can they manifest themselves more largely in times of transition. But this last one is identity. How is your identity impacted by this transition? And you're a savvy group. You all are aware of people who live overseas. And how much and I'll use the language, your identity gets tied up in what you're doing. And for better or for worse, we collectively are trying to fight this, but the pedestal that missionaries are held up on. And so if you're held up on this pedestal, you begin to wonder, who am I apart from? This was a huge one that I went through as I transitioned off the field. I had spent the vast majority of my adulthood in China. The most descriptive attribute of me was China. Oh, that's your daughter who lives in China. That's your sister that lives in China. That's your friend that lives in China. That was the defining thing that helped to make sense of, oh, you've got 3 daughters, it's that daughter. Oh, you've got 27 friends, it's that friend. Oh, you've got, however many aunts, it's that aunt. And so who was I when China is no longer the most descriptive word? I can still say the one who used to live in China. But there comes a point where you look desperate. So working through, what is your identity? What is your identity? How much is it tied to an organization? And these are not bad things. Again, they are not bad things. But when they begin to be loosened or it changes in some way, and you suddenly realize, oh, as much as I fully grasp in my head my identity is in Christ, my heart is now saying that it didn't 100% believe that. My heart is now saying it's a little bit more in this area than I realized. And that I myself have attributed value to it, that it is there, it is valuable, but it is not ultimately valuable. And trying to sort out areas, and realizing, oh my word, I feel some shame that I no longer live overseas. And even though I lived overseas for many years, sometimes now that I, I live in Denver, I still sometimes wonder, have I lost all credibility? And this is a big one that God is just re-challenging me, that credibility has nothing to do with location. And value has nothing to do with location. It's about obedience. And right now, I'm supposed to be in the United States. So I could be in China and on the surface look whatever, credible or cool or right on. And I know that is disobedient. That is just so it looks good, not so that it is in alignment with what God has. And I think, again, as God calls us deeper and deeper and deeper into His identity for who we are, it doesn't matter if it makes sense to other people. And that's where I think God wants all of us to be on. But as you're working with people, helping them get their identity so deeply in Christ, so when these other areas come up and it might not make as much sense to other people on the outside, that it sort of doesn't matter. I was talking with Julie at lunch, meeting with my spiritual director. We've been talking about how in times of stress, we've all heard about fight, flight, or freeze. She said, well, actually, God has a fourth option for us, and it's to be free. That in any situation we're in, when you fight, flight, or freeze, it's kind of about the other person or the organization or whatever's going on. But when you can be free, there is a holy indifference that you are invested, but ultimately it's God's outcome. So there is a freedom, and that is what God wants for all of us, is that level of freedom. whether we're in a time of transition or we're in a time of stability, that our identity is rooted in Him, our sense of who we are. Yeah. But as I said on my little bullet points here, the thing about identity is it cuts to the heart in ways that the other areas simply don't. You know, whether I'm a procrastinator or I do stuff ahead of time, that's kind of cute. That doesn't cut to my identity the same way. Whether I do something all the way or most of the way, it can be frustrating, but that doesn't cut right deep in here. Even pre and post grieving, it's more interesting information. It helps me understand myself. But I can also see if I was this way or that way, it really kind of doesn't matter. But the identity questions, as people are in transition, they begin to cling to things that they think this will help me be valuable in this mushy in-between time when things are not totally settled. And so I think for us as practitioners, first of all, we can just validate that your identity ultimately is rooted in Christ, but it's also in flux now. And that being in flux is really hard. We can just validate that being in flux is really hard. And sometimes it's easy to forget how hard it is when you're not in that flux situation. The first year back from the field, it wasn't totally, I just knew my time in China was over. And God made that abundantly clear. And I'm sure you can guess now a little bit knowing me for like a whole hour. My personality, I like to have plans and things laid out, but there was nothing laid out. God just said, you need to go, and then it will unfold. Well, that is not what responsible people in their 40s do. Responsible people in their 40s have a job and a plan, and they're not kind of homeless and reliving the college dream of living with their parents. But God was like, that is, your identity is in me, and it's not in what people think is pathetic or responsible. Those are words in your head, Amy. Those are not. And if those in other people's heads, that's between them and me. That's not your fight. Your fight is obedience. Your fight is to put the foot in front of the next foot and just keep taking those steps I've called you to take. That's what you need to do. And so that year was I was just rereading some stuff because I'm not in that place anymore. So it's easy to forget how mucky that was and how identity was so heightened. And all of the different things I tried and the different things that kind of crashed and burned and all of that. And just to remind people, it is very mucky when your identity is in flux. And sadly, referencing our friends Mike and Ann, Mike died very unexpectedly this year. So Ann is now a widow with 4 children, 2 in college and 2 in high school. And her identity changed almost like that. He was diagnosed last April, and he died in September. And so she is in a totally new identity she did not want. She did not want. And so it's all of that redefining, refiguring it out, whether it was wanted, you're getting married, you're having a baby, or it's totally unwanted. Your visa is canceled, this government will not let you back in. Your spouse has died. Your child has left the faith. These things that you're like, I don't want that, but it is now a part of my identity. So how do I incorporate that in? Understanding that's part of my identity, but ultimately my identity is in Christ. And that's not merely a slogan, that truly is the rock bed of my life. And I think that's why these are so important to be talking to people all along as you walk with them. And so you're already having the conversation. So when those times of transition come up, you can say, hey, how is your procrastination factoring in here? How is your task completion level factoring in here? How do you see your identity being influenced by this transition? And we can just have those kind of ongoing conversations as we're in life together. So, as I said, Looming Transitions is on Amazon. It's also up here for $10 if you would like. And on gumroad.com/Amy Young are additional resources. You'll see actually on Gumroad, I love because you can put up free material. So you just enter $0 and someone gets it for free. Velvet Ashes, in the fall, we did a Bible study on Consider the Birds. So 10 different birds in the Bible. So if you want a free Bible study, there's a free Bible study up there. That's the only reason I mentioned that. I'm working right now on a second book that I hope will come out soon. So you can just sort of, stay tuned to the world and maybe you'll hear about it. It's called Love, Amy, an accidental memoir told in newsletters from China. So it's the first 9 years of my newsletters. I just want to encourage and inspire people who are writing newsletters and to empower them. Newsletters are so fun. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful last session. I hope you have a little bit more space for the last plenary.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.